grown-ups trying to follow what's happening aren't so sure. Hidayet said, "I'm not hoping for anything. For 10 years now, the Serbs have been lying to us. We don't trust anyone."
3 months old.
In the Daftalari family's tent, they're wondering about their relatives back home, still trying to survive in Kosovo.
I don't know, just think about that. How are they? What they do? Did they have food to eat something? Are they afraid?
They don't know much about what's happened, and they want to know everything.
And she wants to see his grandfather.
People here are being very cautious. After all, they've been through a lot, and they know the Serb authorities too well. But I've never seen so many smiling faces in these camps. Jeremy Bowen, BBC News.
And to any viewers just joining us, this is an extended edition of The World Today, and we are bringing you live coverage of the Security Council debate at the United Nations in New York, the debate which will later end in a vote on to adopt formally the G8 peace plan to resolve finally the Kosovo crisis.
The result of the voting is as follows: 14 votes in favor, no votes against, 1 abstention. The draft resolution has been adopted as Resolution 1244/1999. I shall now give the floor to those members of the Council who wish to make statements following the voting. I give the floor to the representative of Slovenia.
Mr. President, Slovenia was among the sponsors of the draft resolution and has voted for its adoption. We believe that this is a timely and a necessary resolution, a resolution which contains all the necessary elements with which the Security Council must address the situation in Kosovo. Let me recall some among them. With the resolution, the Security Council realistically recognizes the existence of the threat to international peace and security, and acting under Chapter 7 provides the legitimacy for the necessary measures of implementation of the resolution. The resolution provides for a comprehensive international military and civilian presences in Kosovo. The mandates of the missions are clear and precise, and at the same time sufficiently flexible. The resolution provides for credible military force and authorizes it to use all the necessary means to fulfill its mandate. This is a prerequisite for the force to establish a safe and secure environment for the return of refugees and internally displaced persons. Finally, the resolution delegates overall responsibility for civilian operations to the UN, with specific responsibility of working with all other institutions and organizations, so that the operations will be conducted in an integrated manner. We expect the security and civilian presence to cooperate towards the same goal and in a mutually supportive manner. The resolution reaffirms the jurisdiction of the International Criminal Tribunal for former Yugoslavia over Kosovo. Full cooperation.
So the debate at the United Nations Security Council goes on, but in fact the Council has now adopted the G8-inspired peace plan to end the Kosovo conflict, and that vote also gives the green light for the immediate deployment of NATO peacekeeping troops into the province of Kosovo. Joining us now,
forces, mainly Italian troops down here, but back along the road we have seen British paratroopers as well, and also French troops. The bulk of them we expect to start moving up over the next 24 hours in what appears to be an 11-day operation to clear the Serb forces from Kosovo itself. Vivian.
Before you go, just explain to us a little bit more about what is actually going on behind you at this moment. You were telling us a little bit about Serb movements before.
Yes, well, it's, I don't know whether we can see, right up on the hilltop over there is actually Kosovo itself, and On top of there has always been, throughout this whole campaign, Serbian patrols on top of the hill. We had thought that they may have started withdrawing, but in fact in the last hour or so we have still seen figures on the top of the hill. Appears to be the Yugoslav army still there, so they're obviously keeping an eye from an observation point there on just what is happening at the border post here. They may, of course, perhaps even stay until the first NATO troops come down here to go across the border. We expect sometime tomorrow. Meanwhile, back in the car park behind me, we've seen Yugoslav army officers. There's we can certainly see there's some NATO force in the foreground, but there's an army officer in a black beret. He's from the Yugoslav army. He's talking to a local Macedonian policeman, and he appears to be the driver of a car which has brought several Yugoslav officers to meet in the cafe over there with NATO officers. And we can only imagine at the moment, we're finding it hard to get ratification of that they're talking about some of the finer point details of the withdrawal. And perhaps, I know that NATO has been asking time and time again of the Yugoslav forces that they give some idea of the obstacles that could lie ahead, and in particular minefields and booby traps that might await the NATO forces once they cross over that border. So perhaps some information of that sort is changing hands at the moment, but a little later on when they come out we'll try and get an idea exactly of the detail of that conversation, Viv.
And of course, Jeremy, as well, they might well come across Serb troops and the KLA still involved in skirmishes around the province. What would NATO troops be under instruction to do if they came across any fighting like that?
We haven't yet had a chance to see what their normal list of instructions are for an operation like that. On each different operation they would be given written instructions, NATO troops, showing exactly what to do if they come into any form of hostile engagement. And we're not sure what orders they've been issued with, but they are not going in there as an aggressive and offensive force. That's been made very clear, but they know that they're going into a potentially hostile environment, and they almost certainly know that they will come across renegade Serbian paramilitaries who have made it very clear that they don't plan to leave along with the Yugoslav army. And of course the KLA, the Kosovo Liberation Army, have also made it very clear that they don't plan to put down their weapons at the moment, so they'll be going in trying to claim the province of Kosovo for themselves. They want to take control of it. So NATO has got to try and insert itself as a buffer between those two forces and to try and at least clear the ground without getting involved in hostile engagements, exchange of fire and so on. But I think they're well prepared for it if they have to. They know that's the situation they're going into, apart from dealing with all these problems of bridges down, blown up roads, unexploded munitions, booby traps, mines and so on, of which they will find very hard to chart until they get in there. But we do understand that special forces have been in ahead already in Kosovo, observing what's going on, observing the troop withdrawals, and presumably recceing the routes that the NATO forces will take over the next few days, when up to 30,000 troops and armour will insert themselves into Kosovo.
End of the conflict. Serbs pull out of Kosovo. NATO is poised to go in.
The UN ratifies the peace deal. NATO calls a halt to the bombing.
Milosevic claims victory and urges unity to rebuild his war-torn nation.
And
there is no choice, one way out, north. The Yugoslav army, unbeaten in the field by the KLA but smashed from the sky by NATO, left Podjevo. Some of them, reservists, conscripts, were relieved to leave behind the horror that has been Kosovo and the deeds perpetrated by certain units. This, if things go to plan, is just the beginning. We crisscrossed central Kosovo all day, and it was clear the military and police were on the move. It won't be easy. In certain areas they are having to use dirt tracks, but from what we saw, the ability to communicate and organize will be sufficient. The senior general of the Pristina Corps said he was acting on orders from Supreme Command. We will leave, he said, and UN troops will come to protect the Serb population. Some aren't waiting and are also leaving, but this trickle is not yet a flood, even as the army withdrawal gathers pace. This scene is being repeated across Kosovo on this historic day, around Pristina, around Podjevo, and here in Mitrovica. We can see on the ground what NATO can see from the air, they're leaving. Tim Marshall, Sky News, Kosovo.
Representative of China.
Within hours of the Serb withdrawal getting underway, the Security Council convened to adopt a resolution paving the way for the KFOR international force to enter Kosovo.
Will those in favor of the draft resolution contained in document S/1999/661 please raise their hand. Those against? Abstentions? 14 votes in favor, no votes against, 1 abstention.
The Security Council vote followed an announcement earlier by NATO Secretary-General of an end to hostilities. The alliance's demands were being met, he said.
I can announce that today that Milosevic has complied with the 5 conditions that the international community had placed. And therefore, a few moments ago, I instructed General Clark to suspend NATO's air operations against Yugoslavia.
Mr. Solana's embrace of his spokesman Jamie Shea was not one of mutual congratulations, rather a reflection of the huge relief that NATO had succeeded in a conflict in which its very survival was at stake. The subdued tone was apparent too in the Prime Minister's words.
There was no yearning on the part of NATO to commence this military action. I feel no sense of triumph now, only the knowledge that our cause was just and was rightly upheld.
The dangers which faced British forces during the war weren't behind them yet, said Mr. Blair. With UK troops about to enter Kosovo, there could be no guarantees that there'd be no loss of life. Mr. Blair paid tribute to President Clinton's steadfastness. He in turn warned that NATO was ready to resume bombing if President Milosevic reneged again.
The Kosovars have been victims of terrible atrocities. Their only hope was that the world would not turn away in the face of ethnic cleansing and killing, that the world would take a stand. We did for 78 days. Because we did, the Kosovars will go home.
For his part, the Yugoslav leader made a rare television appearance, telling the Serbian people that almost 600 troops and police had been killed in the bombing. Yugoslavia had won, he said, because the question of independence for Kosovo was closed. Ahead of the Security Council resolution being adopted, NATO troops were pouring into countries neighbouring Yugoslavia, assembling for what will be the biggest armed deployment on the European landmass since the D-Day landings on the Normandy beaches. Graham Leach, Sky News.
Well, thousands of British troops are waiting for their final orders, ready with tanks, heavy guns and minefield clearing teams poised to lead the way. Keith Graves has been looking at preparations for the British advance across the border.
The approaches to the border crossing at Blace, the main route out for tens of thousands of refugees, and now the main route in for NATO forces, has been secured by Italian soldiers. It's Macedonian territory, but the ridge commanding it is inside Kosovo, and the Serbian army has positions there. This will be NATO's first objective, to ensure KFOR can move over the border safely. To facilitate that, Serb and NATO officers met at the border this afternoon. A military detail meeting to synchronize movements, said a NATO officer, and the Serbs were proving cooperative. Just back from the border, nearly 2,000 men of the 5th Airborne Brigade, 1 para and the Gurkhas, are on 4-hour standby to move north in Chinook and Puma helicopters to secure the ridges and bridges and tunnels along the first vital 6 miles of the road inside Kosovo. He is assuming his men will be entering what the army calls a hostile environment.
I'm sure there'll be a substantial amount of ordnance there, and there's quite a lot of intelligence coming out now, but clearly mines, anti-personnel mines, anti-tank mines, and perhaps some of the bridges may have been prepared for demolition, all of which will need to be cleared before we can declare any route that we're asked to clear, to be clear, and until we've done that, we won't be able to pass the armoured formations forward into the province.
The first of those armoured formations will be 650 men of the Spearhead Battle Group with Challenger tanks and Warrior armoured vehicles. This is the so-called 12-hour force, the time the planners have given to secure and make safe that first stretch of road into Kosovo. After that, the rest of the 30,000-strong force will start pouring in by land and air. This is the provisional schedule for the move north of Qershor, the predominantly British peace force. In phase 1, that first 12 hours, they should take Qershor, the main town across the border from Macedonia. In phase 2, which could take up to 2 days, they hope to secure the mountainous region around Qershor. When that's achieved, they'll start moving the bulk of Qershor into the rest of Kosovo, and by day 10, NATO should be ready to divide the province into 5 sectors. The largest and central sector will be under the control of British troops. Americans, Germans, French and Italians will patrol the other areas, with the Russian force not under direct NATO command in northeast Kosovo. Speed is of the essence to ensure no vacuum is left between the departing Serbs and the arriving NATO forces, because a vacuum could be filled by ethnic Albanian irregulars bent on revenge against Serb civilians. If that happened, one kind of ethnic cleansing could be replaced by another. Keith Graves, Sky News, on the Macedonian-Kosovo border.
Towards Kosovo, believing it's now just a matter of time before they can go home. The refugees who've left family behind are apprehensive at what they might find when they do return.
I am sure that we will, when we go back there in Kosovo, we won't find anything. House, cars, anything else. Everything is destroyed. I just hope I will find my 2 sons there.
Preparations are underway for the journey, and running repairs to the carts which will transport them are being carried out with a renewed urgency.
I am very happy. I'm very happy about the peace agreement. But I still don't believe it, because we are so much afraid, because everything that we've been through, and I believe it when I see it.
After several months of harsh brutality, there is at last some joy in these camps. But there's a long way to go before these people can return to their homes safely. There are landmines and booby traps to be negotiated along the way. This little baby was born a few days ago. His mother hopes he'll be brought up in a very different Kosovo. Everyone in the camps is desperate to go home. The only blot on the horizon is what they'll see when they get there. Ross Appleyard, Sky News, Albania.
Let's give you some fun.
The same number of troops coming from NATO members France and Italy. Almost 30 countries have announced they're willing to help support the Qershor presence. The soldiers will have a difficult and hazardous mission. Their job, secure peace, if necessary, with their weapons. They have to restore some kind of infrastructure in Kosovo and allow for the safe return of hundreds of thousands of refugees. Their preliminary deployment has been organized into 5 protection zones. The Germans would occupy the southern region around Prizren. The United States will move into eastern Kosovo. Italy is slated to control the west of the province, and the French will take the north. British troops will occupy the largest of the 5 areas. It remains unclear whether Russia will be allocated a region of its own. Western diplomats fear that refugees would be unwilling to return to areas with a Russian military presence.
Berger hasn't seen her son since March. He's a soldier in the German armed forces waiting on a warship in the Mediterranean. Doris is worried about him, even though it looks as if peace is just around the corner.
I hope everything works out well. I hope that he really doesn't have to go directly into action, right to the front line.
Hans-Peter von Kirchbach, Chief of the Armed Forces Staff, welcomes Doris and other mothers in for a chat in the city of Koblenz. He explains what their sons can expect in their future duties. Doris Bamberger is happy to get some first-hand information at last. The general hopes to allay the women's fears.
I will tell the mothers that they can be proud that their sons are involved in an exercise that is very important for the future stability of Europe.
And that their sons are fulfilling an important humanitarian duty, namely protecting the many refugees when they return to Kosovo. Naturally, von Kirchbach tells the mothers about the risks. risks that are incalculable.
There's a question of armed stragglers, of the KLA, and of the mines. These are certainly the main problems that we have to worry about from the start.
It's done Doris good to meet other mothers who feel like her. Despite her fears, she supports her son's mission in Kosovo.
NAVO zomaar Kosovo binnen kan rijden. In het kamp Stenkelwerd zitten de bussen vol met vluchtelingen die naar Ierland willen.
Met de Milosevic en de boothuis mag niet meer. Hij werd hem verdet en ren. Gismon kan rijden, ren, werd hem doen en dan hij dit en dat dan.
En ze zien het dan voorlopig maar als een korte vakantie om wat bij te komen van alle ellende. Om dan over een paar weken of misschien een paar maanden terug te gaan naar Kosovo. En haast om weer naar huis te gaan, zien wat daar nog van is overgebleven, lijkt niemand hier te hebben.
Signs of peace are visible in Kosovo. Yugoslav forces are pulling out of the province under the terms of a deal signed by NATO and Yugoslav military leaders. Convoys of cars and trucks carried troops, special police, and anti-aircraft weapons across the border. Yugoslavia has 11 days to complete the withdrawal.
Western military officials say the first international peacekeeping troops are expected to move into Kosovo on Saturday. Britain, France, Germany, Italy, and the United States will command multinational divisions in 5 sectors of the province. Hundreds of American soldiers began arriving in Macedonia Thursday. Most are paratroopers from the 82nd Airborne Division. They were flown in by helicopter from neighboring Albania. United States Marines are also headed for peacekeeping duty in Kosovo. Some 1,900 came ashore in Greece on Thursday. They are now moving overland to Macedonia, and they are expected to reach their staging area by late Friday.
Russia, a key player in brokering a settlement, wants its own peacekeepers to patrol part of Kosovo. A delegation led by U.S. Deputy Secretary of State Strobe Talbot is in Moscow, trying to overcome disagreements on how Russia can cooperate with the NATO-led operation. Talbot says that in the Kosovo conflict, Russia and the U.S. have passed the greatest test of their relationship since the end of the Cold War.
The leaders of the United States and Yugoslavia have vastly different views on the outcome of the war. U.S. President Bill Clinton says the NATO allies took a stand against ethnic cleansing and prevailed. Yugoslav President Slobodan Milosevic claimed victory for not surrendering Kosovo.
We have shown that our army is invincible. I am sure the best army in the world, and by the army I mean the soldiers, police, all forces of national defense. They showed the entire world how one defends his nation, how unified and strong we stood, because the people were the army, and the army was the people.
In the past 4 months, we have seen some of the worst inhumanity in our lifetime. But we've also seen the bravery of our troops, the resolve of our democracy, the decency of our people, and the courage and determination of the people of Kosovo.
The territorial integrity of our country can never be questioned again. We survived and defended the country and raised the entire problem to the pinnacle of world authority, the pyramid, the United Nations.
From the beginning, we had 3 clear objectives: the withdrawal of Serb forces, the deployment of an international security force with NATO at the core, the return of the Kosovars to their home to live in security and self-government. Serbia now has accepted these conditions, and the process of implementing them is underway.
In Germany, where she has been meeting with foreign ministers from the world's major powers. Madam Secretary, in this very complex endeavor, is it not simplistic to talk about winning?
I think that it is very difficult to divide things into winners and losers, but in listening to David Ensor, there is a clear loser, and that is Slobodan Milosevic. who has led his country to disaster and who has lost control over Kosovo. He is the clear and only real loser in this.
However, Madam Secretary, as long as he remains in power, can this be a pure victory for NATO?
Well, I think that what we have shown is that NATO is the overwhelming military force. It is composed of 19 democracies who worked together incredibly well through a prolonged period and showed dedication to a set of principles that among which is a very important one, that individual life matters and that ethnic cleansing is impossible. But I do think that none of us think that the road ahead is easy. We have an awful lot of work to do. I think you've pointed out the tragedy of the refugees, and we have to work on that. We also have to have a humanitarian outlook towards the people of Serbia, and what has to happen is that a democratic Serbia where democratic principles are practiced must ultimately be welcomed into a Euro-Atlantic community, but Milosevic has never shown any indication of democratic principles, and he is an indicted war criminal.
1, 2, 3.
Well, I never believed it was Madeleine's war. What it was a war by the democracies, led by President Clinton, against what is a basic evil that had to be eradicated at the end of the 20th century. And I have spent a lot of time now with my colleagues from the 19 democracies. It's their war. It was all our war, and it's everybody's victory.
Around noon, when Yugoslav forces are beginning their withdrawal from Kosovo, Albanian border guards decide to do it, to dip their toes in the water to see how hot it is, to open the locked gates of the Marina border crossing on the Yugoslav-Albanian frontier, and take the chance that Serb snipers or NATO bombs will not ruin this first day of peace. 15 minutes later, at noon, they decide not to push their luck and leave the border crossing. They are convinced the Serbs are still in the neighborhood. Are there Serbs at the border post on the other side? They're over there, says the commander. But you couldn't see over to their post. The Albanian